right, let's give you the markets update now. After ending the session weaker, the local trade will be chasing those lost gains today. The JSE weakening further on Tuesday, tracking weaker global markets as the banking sector jitters continued and investors bracing for the Federal Reserve's rates announcement on Wednesday. Jimmy Moyaha is independent analyst and joins us now for a quick update. Jimmy, good morning to you. Let's start with your overall view of the markets today. How are they faring? Let's include in the rand.
Morning, Lily. Morning to the viewers. As you rightly mentioned, yesterday wasn't the best day for our local bourse, wasn't the best for our local currencies as well. It looks as though today may be a continuation of that. So a lot is on edge at the moment around what we can expect from the U.S. Fed and how that will drive sentiment going forward. We know that overnight U.S. markets were in the red. We saw the Dow, the S&P, as well as the Nasdaq all shedding more than 1%. But we did see that Asian markets are trading in the green throughout this Asian session, or the early morning rather, with Shanghai leading the bunch up about 1.1%. In early trade on our local side, we've seen that all shares up about 0.2%. We're seeing that financials are taking a bit of a knocking. They're down about 2/3 of a percent. And this could potentially be as a result of the sentiment around the world at the moment around the financial sector, largely in part to what's happening in the U.S. from their second-tier banks and that sort of thing. We've definitely seen that has rattled markets and the confidence within the financial space. But financial sector stocks at the moment in South Africa are the weakest performing stocks. We saw as well off the back of the news of First Republic that the financial stocks locally were all down more than 5% in some cases. So it'll be interesting to see how the conversations that are happening in the U.S. continue to affect our local market.
Well, let's talk about those investor sentiments. They are awaiting the conclusion of the two-day Federal Open Market Committee to see if the U.S. Fed will provide some clues about when it is that it will end its rate hike campaign. What are emerging markets like South Africa, for example, looking to see here?
Well, I think this is going to be quite an important meeting for the Fed. We had anticipated a Fed announcement or Fed rate hike of 25 basis points or 0.25%. That was sort of starting to get priced in for quite some time in the couple of weeks leading up to this. But now since the default of the First Republic Bank, I mean, that is the second largest default in U.S. banking history, but it also puts a great spotlight on the pressure that the banking sector in the U.S. is under as a result of the interest rate decision-making that has taken place up to now. So it'll be interesting to see how the U.S. has or how the U.S. now takes their stance on this, because in the past they've said that there is no banking crisis, the banking situation is under control, but they've gone to the extent of breaching some U.S. laws in order to ensure that J.P. Morgan takes over from the First Republic following what happened with the First Republic bankruptcy. So it'll be interesting to see how that narrative is now addressed from a Fed point of view. We know that alongside that interest rate decision, we have that meeting that happens shortly thereafter. So that'll be guidance from market perspective as to what we can expect going forward in terms of other rate hikes that might potentially follow, as well as what the U.S. might do in terms of pivoting on their stance in terms of how they assist their economy. I mean, the U.S. right now currently has a higher percentage of going into a higher probability, or rather, sorry, of going into a recession than South Africa. And we know that South Africa has its own host of problems. And so it tells you how dire the picture is in the U.S. if they need to now balance out what they do from a monetary policy perspective, but also how they avoid triggering a recession in the U.S., which could ultimately lead to a global recession. So it'll be interesting to see how that side of the conversation is addressed by the Fed. But from an emerging market perspective as well, our Q will then follow suit from there, because if you look at how emerging markets, particularly South Africa, have been measuring or pacing their rate hikes, it's been very much in line with what the U.S. Fed has been doing to almost align our viewpoint with that of curbing inflation across the board. And that's been something that's been a narrative that's been across all central banks around the world. So it'll be interesting to see how the U.S.'s narrative then filters into how other markets like South Africa then see their inflationary pictures, but also their own domestic interest rate decisions going forward.
Let's talk company news. MTN Uganda's results for the quarter which ended on the 31st of March 2023. Those results are out. How did they perform?
They performed exceptionally well. I mean, Q1 results show that the subscription data is up. They've increased their mobile subscribers, their active data subscribers, their margins are up. Their capital expenditure has come down as well. I mean, if you remember MTN Uganda in 2020 renewed that licensing for their for that license renewal, and they're amortizing that over the next 10 years or so. So they started that in 2020. They're still continuing with that amortization plan, and it looks as though, by all accounts, the numbers are starting to show that that was a good decision from them. Their service revenues up, their data revenues up, their fintech revenues up. Obviously, for the first quarter, this is a good indication of how they could potentially perform for the rest of the year and what that means for the overall performance of the MTN group. So this, by all accounts, is a good Q1 performance for the Ugandan business. We'll see how it ties into the other group performances. We know MTN tends to report a lot of their group performances close to each other as well.